Well, hello everyone. Just to introduce myself, my name's Dennis Fancett and I'm from the Diocese of Newcastle Generous Giving Team. And it's a real pleasure to have this opportunity to talk to you online today, exploring the place generosity, indeed generous giving, should play in our lives as Christians. Now, I remember when I was a teenager, quite a long time ago now, living in southeast London, one day in the school holidays, a group from our church youth group decided to have a day out together. And we went by train to a place called Margate on the Kent coast, which had a nice beach. And in those days, it had a pleasure park with big dippers and fun fair rides and all sorts. And we had a really great time, really enjoyed ourselves. But eventually evening came, it started to get a bit chilly on the beach and it was time to go home. But it was still an hour or so before our train and we thought about getting some chips from the chip shop, but most of us didn't have enough money left. We all dug into our pockets and stuff. Most of us had about 50p, not enough to buy anything, even in those days. But there was one boy who'd been very careful with his money all day and he still had a nice, crisp £10 note. And then one of the girls in our group, she had a great idea. She suggested that if we all clubbed together and put whatever money we had into a kitty, there would be enough to buy at least a few portions of chips, which we could all share between us. And everyone thought that was a great idea and we were all eager to start and get going, except of course, the guy with the £10 note. He didn't think it was a very good idea at all. And as I recall, nevertheless, somehow feeling obliged, peer pressure and all that to join in, he kind of sulked all the way home and for the rest of the evening. You see, the point is that sharing can be a great idea if someone is sharing with us. It's not always so attractive if we are being asked to share with someone else. Another thing about sharing, it doesn't work if we're told we must, if it's a rule or obligation that we have to comply with. It only works when deep in our hearts we hold the desire to be a blessing to those around us. Now, in Acts chapter 2, verses 42 to 47, we see the Apostle Peter preaching his very first sermon. He was a man without training, without education, without anything actually, apart from having lived and worked with Jesus for 3 years and knowing that despite his terrible denial of his Lord in his hour of need, he was forgiven, he was reconciled and included. And yet the results of that first sermon were startling. 3,000 people are added to the church, and that's just day one. But those 3,000 people would have included both rich and poor people, people with plenty, people in need. And strangely, although Peter's teaching is not recorded as having touched on the point, people knew instinctively that wasn't right. They wanted to share, they wanted to give. This is always the reaction of those who have been truly touched by God. What did the wider community think of this generosity? Did people think they were mad to give away their possessions and share what they had with people from different social backgrounds and nationalities, complete strangers until a day before? Were they laughed at? Were they told they were being scammed? Quite the opposite. It seems this countercultural way of living found favour with the community at large. We see that in verse 47. And yet more were added to the church as the days progressed. So the first thing we can say about giving, in particular giving to God or giving to the church, is that it has to be in response to having had and living from day by day an encounter with Jesus. Now, in some cases, that encounter starts with a one-off moment or experience, as it did with those people listening to Peter. They were astonished, astounded, arrested by his words. They made a decision. They repented and believed. And from that moment onwards, their lives started to change. And one of the very clear expressions of that change is that they started to give. Not just a little, not just a token, they started to give generously. Now, for others of us, we can't necessarily point to a specific single moment where we moved from not having faith to having faith. Maybe we've grown up in the church, maybe it's been with us since childhood, maybe our steps into a relationship with God have been several small ones rather than one big one, and gradually, over a period of time, we've increasingly come to understand that we are made in the image of a generous God, a God who is against injustice and inequality, and a God who calls us to play our part in fighting these things and helping to build his church. It doesn't matter how we came to the point of being a person of faith. If today we are happy to consider and declare ourselves to be a Christian, a person who has had an encounter with Jesus, then surely a natural response to that encounter is that we would want to give. Later, as we know, they introduced a level of administration into their giving. We're told in Acts chapter 6 that some people, including Stephen, who became the very first Christian martyr, were appointed deacons. And this meant that they could ensure no one was being overlooked. It wouldn't be the case that everyone would give to the same need and some would be inundated with blessing whilst others were going unnoticed. Now, as some of you, if not many of you will know, here in our diocese, we have this wonderful system called parish share. It allows those parishes who have more to contribute more so that those who have less can continue with their ministry. I can also say that our diocese has benefited from amazingly generous gifts from other dioceses who have made gifts to us, as other parts of the country likewise seek to share their resources with us. But perhaps you're thinking, actually, I'm the person with the 50p. I'm not the person with the £10 note. Sharing is okay, but we don't have much to start with. Other people should be sharing with me. Well, if that's your thought, the first thing to say is thank you for your honesty. It's always the best starting point as we start to consider how God might be speaking to us or prompting us. And the second thing to say is, going back to my story about our day on the beach as teenagers, you see, even the people with only 50p still gave their 50p. They were not exempt or excused. Everyone gave what they had according to their ability. Now, it's always unwise to take an illustration too far, but I could go on and add that I'm still in touch with a number of friends from my old teenage youth group. And guess what? I mean, I wouldn't know for sure because we don't go around asking people for details of their income, but, you know, we all got different exam results, we all went off into different careers, and some of us who only had 50p then have considerably more money now, perhaps, than the person who at that time had the £10 note. You see, giving and sharing is a habit which will serve us through every season of life and every season of the soul. It might be that those who have less money now will find that they have more than others in a different season. And likewise, those who have more money now might have less in a different season. The Apostle Paul wrote in Philippians chapter 4, verses 12 to 13, I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I've learnt the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. So what's our response to finding faith? Is it to jealously keep what we have for ourselves in order to make sure we are not unfairly sharing whatever it is we might have with others? I do hope and trust that is not the case. Or do we give, but give reluctantly, under compulsion, because we think we must, or because someone has told us to, like my friend with the £10 note, never really understanding the joy of giving, the joy of blessing something or someone else, and perhaps, therefore, never really in turn understanding how much God has blessed us. Or is our reaction like those first 3,000 believers? Do we find we are so impacted by the power of the gospel and the privilege of reaching a position where we too can say, I am a person of faith, that we wish to give, to support the ministry of our local parish church and to contribute to sharing resources and needs across the diocese? Let the words of the Acts account challenge us as we ask God privately what it should mean for us. Thank you so much for listening to me. God bless your parish or benefice wherever you are. I hope these words have been helpful, and God bless you. Thank you. Amen.